Why does pain, whether physical, emotional, or existential, seem to follow us no matter what we do? We chase happiness, success, and fulfillment, yet suffering lingers like a shadow. Imagine this. You finally achieve your biggest goal. For a moment, you feel victorious. But then, a new problem arises. A new desire takes over. And just like that, the happiness fades. It's a never-ending cycle, one that humanity has struggled with for centuries. But what if someone had already explained why suffering is inevitable? What if there was a way to understand it, accept it, and even master it? One man spent his life exploring this question, Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most radical and misunderstood philosophers in history. His insights into pain, suffering, and the human condition were groundbreaking, and today they are more relevant than ever. Arthur Schopenhauer was no ordinary philosopher. Born in 1788, he lived a life of isolation, rejection, and intellectual rebellion. He was a pessimist, yes, but not in the way most people think. Unlike other philosophers who tried to justify suffering, Schopenhauer confronted it head-on. He believed that life at its core is built on suffering, not happiness. In his view, suffering isn't just a part of life, it is the default state of existence. His ideas were so radical that he was ignored during his lifetime. But years later, thinkers like Nietzsche, Freud, Einstein, and even modern psychologists realized the power of his philosophy. And now, in the modern world, where stress, anxiety, and dissatisfaction are everywhere, his ideas feel more relevant than ever. If there's one truth that Schopenhauer believed in more than anything else, it's this: not because of bad luck, not because of injustice, not even because of human cruelty, but because suffering is built into existence itself. No matter who you are, where you live, or how much you achieve, you will suffer. Pain is not an accident. It is the default state of life. But why? What makes suffering so inescapable? To answer that, we have to understand Schopenhauer's most radical idea, the hidden force behind all human misery, the will. If there's one force that dominates all of existence, according to Schopenhauer, it is this: not in a positive, life-affirming sense, not in a way that brings peace or fulfillment, but in a way that enslaves us, controls us, and keeps us trapped in endless suffering. Because the will to live is not about happiness, it is about survival, it is about struggle, it is about a never-ending chase for things that, deep down, we know will never satisfy us. Why? Because the will doesn't care about your happiness. It only cares about keeping life going. What if I told you that everything you chase in life, every goal, every dream, every moment of pleasure, is nothing more than an illusion? That the things you desire the most are not the key to happiness, but the cause of your suffering? This is exactly what Schopenhauer believed. And in this chapter, we will uncover why pleasure is an illusion, why happiness never lasts, and how modern society has trapped us in an endless cycle of dissatisfaction. So, is there a way out? Is there a way to stop suffering? Schopenhauer believed there was, but the answer is not what you might expect. He argued that the key to mastering suffering lies in understanding it. Once we truly grasp the nature of the will and the cycle of desire, we can begin to free ourselves from its grip. This doesn't mean we eliminate suffering entirely. Instead, we learn to navigate it, accept it, and even use it to our advantage. In a world obsessed with happiness and success, Schopenhauer's philosophy offers a stark but liberating truth. By understanding the nature of pain, desire, and the will, we can find a deeper sense of peace, not by chasing happiness, but by embracing the reality of existence. So, the next time you feel trapped in the cycle of suffering, remember Schopenhauer's wisdom. It might just be the key to finding freedom in a world that never stops demanding more. Schopenhauer believed that human existence is like a pendulum, swinging endlessly between two extremes. On one side is pain, the struggle, the suffering, the relentless chase for something we don't have. On the other side is boredom, the emptiness we feel once we finally achieve what we wanted. Most people spend their entire lives oscillating between these two states. When we don't have what we want, we suffer from pain. When we get it, we suffer from boredom. And as soon as boredom sets in, we start chasing something new, dragging us back to pain. It's a vicious cycle, a trap with no escape. And no matter who you are, you cannot avoid it. Schopenhauer believed that suffering isn't just about physical pain, it's also the psychological torment of desire. Let's break this down. Pain comes from wanting something you don't have. It's the struggle of working hard for success, but never feeling satisfied. Wanting love, but experiencing heartbreak. Chasing wealth, but always needing more. This is the suffering of effort. It keeps you moving. It keeps you alive. But it also keeps you trapped in endless dissatisfaction. Now imagine you finally achieve your goal. You make the money, win the game, or find the relationship you've been chasing. For a while it feels good. But then emptiness creeps in. You realize that what you worked for isn't as fulfilling as you thought. So you start looking for something new to chase. This is boredom, the second form of suffering. And for Schopenhauer, boredom is just as painful as struggle. Because a life with no challenges, no desires, no goals becomes meaningless. So people force themselves back into the cycle. They create new struggles just to avoid the suffering of emptiness. They jump into new relationships, new jobs, new addictions, not because they need them, but because they fear boredom more than pain. Schopenhauer's philosophy isn't just an abstract theory, it's happening all around us today. Let's look at how modern life keeps us trapped in this endless cycle. You feel lonely, pain. You scroll through social media, post pictures, and get likes, pleasure. The excitement fades and you feel empty, boredom. You start scrolling again, trapped in an endless loop. Social media promises happiness, but only delivers temporary relief from pain, followed by boredom. You feel unsatisfied with your life, pain. You buy something new, a phone, a car, expensive clothes, pleasure. The excitement fades. You feel empty, boredom. You start wanting something else, and the cycle repeats. Big corporations profit from your suffering. They sell you desires only to make sure you never feel truly fulfilled. You feel lonely, pain. You enter a relationship, pleasure. Over time, the excitement fades. Routine sets in. You feel bored. You start longing for something new, leading to dissatisfaction or breakups. Many people confuse love with the thrill of the chase, never realizing that boredom is inevitable. Schopenhauer believed that most people will stay trapped in this cycle forever. They will chase pleasure, avoid boredom, suffer pain, only to start all over again. But he also believed there is a way out, not by chasing more, not by escaping pain, but by understanding the truth about suffering and learning how to detach from it. And that is exactly what we will explore in the next chapter. Imagine a moment where everything stops. No stress, no worries, no painful thoughts, just pure immersion in a song, a painting, a poem. For those few moments, nothing else matters. This is the power of art. And Schopenhauer believed it was one of the few true escapes from suffering. But why? How does art help us detach from pain? And why did Schopenhauer consider it more powerful than happiness itself? In this chapter, we'll explore his fascinating views on art and how it can help us transcend suffering. Schopenhauer's entire philosophy revolves around the will, that blind, restless force that keeps us trapped in desire, dissatisfaction, and suffering. But he believed that art had a unique power. It could silence the will. When we experience great art, whether it's music, literature, painting, or poetry, our desires temporarily disappear. We stop wanting, we stop striving, and for a brief moment, we simply exist, fully immersed in the experience. This, Schopenhauer argued, is the closest we can get to true peace. Because in those moments, we are no longer prisoners of pain and boredom. We become pure observers, free from suffering. Schopenhauer believed that different forms of art provided different levels of escape. Some forms could distract us, but others could transport us beyond suffering itself. Among all forms of art, Schopenhauer believed music was the most powerful. Why? Because unlike literature or painting, music doesn't just describe emotions, it creates them. A sad melody can make you feel sorrow without experiencing loss. A triumphant symphony can make you feel victorious without winning anything. A peaceful tune can soothe the mind even when life is painful. Schopenhauer saw music as a direct reflection of the will itself. It bypasses the intellect and speaks straight to the soul. This is why people turn to music during breakups, grief, or deep emotional moments. It's not just entertainment, it's an escape from suffering. Books allow us to step outside of ourselves. For a while, we forget our own struggles and become someone else. We live through the triumphs of a hero, the tragedies of a lost soul, the wisdom of a philosopher. Schopenhauer believed that literature expands our perspective, allowing us to detach from our own pain. This is why great novels, poetry, and philosophy remain timeless, because they give us a glimpse into something greater than our personal suffering. Schopenhauer also believed that paintings, sculptures, and nature itself could provide escape. Why? Because when we truly observe beauty, we forget ourselves. Looking at a breathtaking landscape, we are no longer trapped in our own problems. Gazing at a powerful painting, we stop worrying about our own desires. Seeing the delicate details of a masterpiece, we realize there's more to life than struggle. Art has the power to lift us beyond the everyday world, even if just for a moment. And in those moments, we are free. Schopenhauer's ideas didn't just remain in philosophy books. They shaped the works of some of history's greatest artists. Here are just a few who were deeply influenced by his views on suffering and art. Nietzsche started as a devoted follower of Schopenhauer. His early works, especially The Birth of Tragedy, expand on Schopenhauer's belief that art, especially music, provides an escape from suffering. Though Nietzsche later rejected Schopenhauer's pessimism, his obsession with art as a life-affirming force remained. Wagner, one of the greatest composers of all time, was obsessed with Schopenhauer's ideas. His operas, filled with deep tragedy, longing, and grandeur, were directly inspired by Schopenhauer's philosophy of music. Wagner believed that music could reveal the deepest truths about human suffering, and his compositions reflect exactly that. Tolstoy's novels, especially Anna Karenina and War and Peace, reflect Schopenhauer's view of human suffering. His characters struggle with desire, disappointment, and the meaning of life, exactly as Schopenhauer described. Tolstoy, like Schopenhauer, believed that art had the power to make suffering meaningful. Beckett's plays, like Waiting for Godot, capture the boredom and absurdity of existence, a direct reflection of Schopenhauer's philosophy. His work shows how humans are trapped in endless cycles of waiting, wanting, and suffering. It's bleak, it's dark, but it's pure Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer believed that art is one of the few ways we can escape suffering, but only temporarily. The moment the song ends, the moment we close the book, the moment we walk away from the painting, we are pulled back into the cycle of desire and pain. But even if the escape is brief, it is real. And in those moments, we experience something Schopenhauer considered sacred, a life beyond suffering, a glimpse of what it means to be truly free. And that is why art is not just entertainment, it is a necessity. Schopenhauer believed that the root of all suffering lies in our relentless craving for things that never truly satisfy us. The more we desire money, status, love, recognition, the more we suffer when those things inevitably disappoint us or slip away. But is there a way out? Yes. And Schopenhauer, much like Stoicism and mindfulness traditions, believed that detachment is the key to inner peace. In this chapter, we'll explore how Schopenhauer's ideas compare to Stoicism and mindfulness, why stepping back from desires is essential, practical ways to detach and reduce suffering in everyday life. At first glance, Schopenhauer's philosophy seems very different from Stoicism and mindfulness. Stoicism is often seen as a philosophy of resilience and self-control. Mindfulness, rooted in Buddhism, is about being present and accepting life as it is. Schopenhauer? He's known as the great pessimist, arguing that life is nothing but suffering. But beneath these differences, they all point to the same solution: detachment. Let's compare how they each approach the idea. The common thread: they all agree that we suffer because we cling too much to people, status, pleasure, or even our own thoughts. Detachment isn't about becoming emotionless, it's about seeing life clearly and refusing to be controlled by temporary desires. You finally get that job promotion you've been dreaming of. You feel great for a while, but then you start stressing about higher expectations, office politics, and what's next. Or maybe you buy a new car, phone, or house. It feels amazing at first, but soon the excitement fades. This is what Schopenhauer called the cycle of suffering. You want something, you get it, and feel happy, briefly. The excitement fades, and you crave something new. You chase the next thing, believing this time it will bring lasting happiness. The problem? It never does. The moment we base our happiness on external things, we set ourselves up for disappointment and suffering. This is why detachment is so important. If we learn to step back from our desires, we stop being slaves to them. If we stop expecting happiness from things outside of us, we gain a sense of inner peace. Schopenhauer's advice? Don't chase happiness. Detach from the illusion that it even exists. Philosophy is great, but how do we actually practice detachment in daily life? Here are some powerful ways to apply Schopenhauer's wisdom today. Before chasing after something, money, love, success, ask yourself, will this truly bring lasting happiness? Or am I just falling into the same cycle again? Often, we realize that what we think we want is just an illusion. This is a powerful tool from Stoicism that aligns with Schopenhauer's ideas. Imagine losing something you love. Visualize hardships. Before they happen, it sounds depressing, but it actually makes you appreciate life more and detach from unnecessary fears. Schopenhauer himself often contemplated death, not as a morbid exercise, but as a way to stay grounded in reality. Schopenhauer warned that materialism is one of the biggest traps. Instead of seeking joy in things, seek it in experiences, knowledge, and inner growth. Minimalism isn't just about owning less, it's about needing less. Schopenhauer never had to deal with Instagram, but if he did, he'd likely say social. Media fuels the illusion of happiness and makes suffering worse. Scrolling through other people's highlight reels makes us believe they are happy while we are missing out. The truth? Everyone is stuck in the same cycle of suffering. The solution? Detach. Spend less time comparing. Focus on your own inner world. Schopenhauer didn't talk about meditation, but his ideas fit perfectly with mindfulness. Sit quietly. Watch your thoughts. Notice how desires appear and disappear. See them for what they are. Just temporary impulses, not ultimate truths. The more you observe your desires, the less control they have over you. Schopenhauer believed that most people live in distraction, avoiding their own thoughts. He often said that solitude is a powerful way to detach from society's illusions. Try spending time alone, not scrolling on your phone, not filling the silence, just being present with your own mind. This helps break free from external pressures and reconnect with your true self. One of the biggest causes of suffering? trying to control things we can't. We want life to be predictable, but it isn't. We want people to always treat us well, but they don't. We want things to last forever, but nothing does. Instead of fighting reality, detach from expectations and accept uncertainty. Schopenhauer, Stoicism, and mindfulness all point to the same truth. Suffering isn't caused by life itself. It's caused by our attachment to things that are always changing. When we detach from false expectations, we find less stress, more clarity, a deeper sense of inner peace. This doesn't mean we should stop caring or enjoying life. It means we should stop expecting things to bring us happiness. Instead of chasing pleasure, we should focus on wisdom. Instead of clinging to desires, we should observe them and let them go. Instead of fearing suffering, we should accept it as part of life. Schopenhauer believed that only through detachment can we truly be free. And maybe, just maybe, that's the closest thing to happiness we'll ever find. Most of us spend our lives trying to avoid pain. We distract ourselves. With work, entertainment, or social media, we chase pleasure, hoping it will erase discomfort. We resist suffering, believing that if we fight hard enough, we can escape it. But what if this resistance is actually making things worse? Schopenhauer argued that the more we fight suffering, the more power it has over us. Modern psychology agrees when we try to suppress pain, whether it's physical, emotional, or existential, it only grows stronger. So, what's the alternative? Acceptance. This chapter explores why fighting pain makes it worse, how accepting suffering brings inner peace. The surprising ways modern psychology supports this ancient wisdom. Think about a time when you were anxious, sad, or in pain. What happened? When you tried to force those feelings away, did they disappear? Or did they linger, return stronger, or transform into something even worse? This is what psychologists call the paradox of suppression. When we try to push negative thoughts away, they rebound. When we try to avoid suffering, we become more sensitive to it. When we refuse to accept pain, we create more suffering on top of suffering. Schopenhauer's philosophy aligns perfectly with this. He believed that pain is an inevitable part of existence. Fighting it is like fighting gravity. It's pointless. Instead, he suggested something radical. Accept it fully. A person is caught in quicksand. The more they struggle and thrash, the faster they sink. But if they relax and stop resisting, they float to the surface. This is how suffering works. The more we resist it, the deeper it pulls us down. But when we accept it, we stop feeding it with fear and frustration. Acceptance doesn't mean liking suffering. It means allowing it to be there without resistance. Recognize suffering when it arises. Instead of denying or suppressing it, acknowledge it. Stop asking, "Why me?" Suffering is universal. The question isn't why you suffer, it's how you respond to it. Shift from, "I must get rid of this," to, "I can sit with this." This simple mindset shift makes pain less overwhelming. Breathe through discomfort. Meditation, deep breathing, and mindfulness help create space around suffering instead of reacting to it. Let go of the illusion of control. Not everything is in your hands, and that's okay. The more we accept pain, the less power it has over us. What's fascinating is that modern psychology has reached the same conclusion as Schopenhauer. Many psychological approaches now emphasize acceptance over resistance when dealing with suffering. Instead of fighting negative emotions, ACT teaches people to accept them as part of life. Studies show that accepting pain reduces its intensity, while fighting it makes it worse. Research shows that mindfulness helps people manage pain, anxiety, and depression, not by eliminating suffering, but by changing how we relate to it. By observing pain instead of fearing it, we break its hold on us. Avoiding fears keeps them alive, but facing them directly, instead of resisting them, helps reduce their power over time. These therapies echo Schopenhauer's wisdom. Resistance deepens suffering, but acceptance dissolves it. Most of us believe happiness comes from avoiding pain, but Schopenhauer saw things differently. Happiness is merely the absence of pain. True peace isn't found by erasing suffering, which is impossible. It's found by no longer being disturbed by suffering when it comes. Paradoxically, once we stop fearing suffering, it loses its grip on us. Imagine if you could go through life without constantly running from discomfort. No more anxiety about things not going your way. No more frustration when life feels unfair. No more suffering about suffering itself. This is the power of acceptance. And in a way, this is true freedom. Schopenhauer's philosophy is often seen as pessimistic, but when you look closer, it's actually liberating. Suffering is inevitable, but how much we suffer depends on how we respond to it. Resisting pain. More suffering, accepting pain, less suffering. So instead of asking, how can I avoid pain? Ask, how can I stop being afraid of pain? Because the moment you stop fighting suffering, it loses its power over you. And that, Schopenhauer believed, is the closest thing to peace we can ever find. Love is often seen as the ultimate source of happiness. We chase romance, believing it will complete us. Movies and books glorify the idea of finding the one. Society tells us that love is the key to a meaningful life, but Schopenhauer saw things differently. To him, love was not about happiness, it was about suffering. He argued that love is not a choice, but a biological trap set by nature. We fall in love not for happiness, but to fulfill the blind will to reproduce. Romantic relationships bring more pain than pleasure, through jealousy, betrayal, and disappointment. In short, love is an illusion that keeps us trapped in suffering. While his view might seem harsh, modern psychology and real-life experiences suggest he had a point. At the heart of Schopenhauer's argument was this: we don't choose love, it chooses us. We think we fall in love because of compatibility, personality, or deep connection. But Schopenhauer believed love was nature's trick to ensure reproduction. We are drawn to people not for long-term joy, but to create the best offspring. This explains why people fall for those who are wrong. For them, once attraction fades, many realize they were never truly compatible. This leads to inevitable suffering. Fear of losing someone leads to anxiety and possessiveness. What starts as passion often turns into routine. Love rarely lasts forever, and its end brings deep pain. No one can truly complete us, yet we expect them to. Even in stable relationships, Schopenhauer argued that happiness is brief, while suffering is constant. When we don't have love, we suffer from loneliness. When we do have love, we suffer from fear of losing it, conflicts, and unmet desires. This creates an endless cycle of longing, disappointment, and pain. So, does this mean we should avoid love altogether? Not necessarily. While Schopenhauer saw love as a trap, his philosophy can help us approach relationships with more awareness. Here's how we can apply his insights today. One of the biggest causes of suffering in relationships is the belief that someone else will make us whole. Schopenhauer reminds us happiness doesn't come from another person, it comes from within. Instead of seeking completion, focus on self-sufficiency. We often believe that love is pure and selfless, but Schopenhauer argued that it's rooted in unconscious biological impulses. Recognizing this can help us avoid getting blindly swept away by infatuation. Most suffering in relationships comes from attachment and fear of loss. Schopenhauer's solution: detachment. Love should be enjoyed without trying to control or cling to it. Everything in life is temporary, including love. Instead of fearing the end, Schopenhauer suggests embracing impermanence. When love fades, let go gracefully instead of resisting change. Schopenhauer believed compassion was a higher form of connection than romantic love. Instead of chasing fleeting passion, focus on kindness, understanding, and deep companionship. Schopenhauer's views on love are unromantic but deeply realistic. Love is not the path to lasting happiness. It's often a source of suffering. Instead of seeking perfect love, we should focus on self-awareness and detachment. The less we cling to love, the less power it has to cause pain. In the end, the only way to love without suffering is to let go of unrealistic expectations. Accept that love is temporary. Focus on self-growth instead of seeking completion in others. By doing this, we can experience love without being destroyed by it. And perhaps that is the closest thing to true freedom in relationships. Life is full of suffering, pain, disappointment, and the absurdity of existence. Schopenhauer believed that suffering was inescapable, but he also recognized that we could change how we respond to it. One of the most unexpected yet powerful ways to deal with suffering is humor. Why does humor help? It allows us to step back from our problems and see them from a different perspective. It turns tragedy into comedy, giving us a sense of control over the chaos of life. It reminds us that we're not alone. Everyone is struggling in their own way. This is why dark humor, satire, and irony exist. When life feels unbearable, sometimes the only response is to laugh. Schopenhauer wasn't known for being funny. He was pessimistic, deeply serious, and saw life as an endless cycle of suffering. But strangely, his philosophy aligns perfectly with dark humor. Dark comedy finds humor in laughing at misery instead of letting it destroy us. Acknowledging that life is often ridiculous and irrational, exposing the harsh truths of existence in a way that entertains. Schopenhauer believed that stepping outside of our suffering, whether through art, music, or philosophy, was the only way to find relief. Humor does the same thing. Instead of being crushed by pain, we mock it, exaggerate it, and make light of it, transforming suffering into something we can handle. Many great comedians use humor as a tool to cope with suffering, often reflecting Schopenhauer's pessimistic but insightful view of life. Carlin's comedy exposed the ridiculousness of human nature, politics, and existence. He saw through the illusions of happiness, success, and societal norms, just like Schopenhauer. His jokes made people laugh, but they also made them question everything. Burnham's comedy blends humor with deep existential dread. His songs and performances explore themes of loneliness, anxiety, and the emptiness of fame. He reflects Schopenhauer's idea that desire leads to suffering, especially in the age of social media. His stand-up is filled with dark observations about relationships, aging, and death. He highlights how humans make life harder for themselves, often by chasing things that won't make them happy. His humor aligns with Schopenhauer's belief that we are our own worst enemies. Gervais often jokes about death, religion, and the absurdity of human beliefs. Like Schopenhauer, he acknowledges that life is pointless, but that doesn't mean we can't laugh at it. His comedy helps people face their fears by taking them less seriously. Schopenhauer's philosophy can feel heavy and depressing, but humor offers a way to lighten the load. Life will be painful, unpredictable, and unfair, but instead of letting it crush us, we can laugh at its absurdity. Humor doesn't erase suffering, but it makes it easier to bear. As the saying goes, if you don't laugh, you'll cry. And maybe, just maybe, Schopenhauer would agree. Suffering is unavoidable. Schopenhauer made this clear. Pain is built into life itself. But what if we could change how we experience it? Mastering suffering isn't about eliminating pain. That's impossible. It's about learning how to respond to it in a way that gives us peace. So, how do we apply Schopenhauer's wisdom in daily life? Let's break it down into practical, actionable strategies. Schopenhauer believed that our constant craving for more keeps us trapped in a cycle of pain. We desire something. We achieve it. We feel happy. for a short while. Then boredom sets in and a new desire takes over. Remind yourself, what I have is enough. Instead of chasing every impulse, pause and ask, will this truly bring lasting happiness? The less you need, the freer you become. The world teaches us to attach our happiness to external things: money, success, relationships. Schopenhauer warned, that attachment leads to suffering because everything is temporary. Focus on effort, not results. Remind yourself that everything changes, and that's okay. If something is causing pain, ask yourself, is this worth my peace? Most people fight against suffering, which only makes it worse. Schopenhauer suggested that acceptance is the key to inner peace. Say, this is painful, and that's okay. Stop asking, why me? Suffering isn't personal, it's part of life. Reframe difficulties as learning experiences. Every struggle makes you stronger. Schopenhauer believed that art helps us transcend suffering. Why? Because it allows us to step outside ourselves and experience life differently. Engage with meaningful art. Read books, watch films, or listen to music that resonates deeply. Express yourself creatively. Write, paint, or play an instrument, not for success, but for peace of mind. Use beauty as a refuge. Spend time in nature, visit a museum, or simply observe the world around you. Schopenhauer saw compassion as the highest virtue. Because when we understand others' suffering, we feel less alone in our own. Listen deeply. When someone shares their struggles, be fully present. Practice small acts of kindness. Help someone without expecting anything in return. Remember, everyone is suffering. Instead of judging others, try to understand them. Schopenhauer was heavily influenced by Eastern philosophy, especially Buddhism and its emphasis on meditation. Meditation helps us detach from thoughts and desires, leading to a calmer state of mind. Start with just 5 minutes a day. Sit quietly, focus on your breath, and let thoughts come and go. Use mindfulness to stay present. Instead of getting lost in regrets or worries, focus on this moment. View thoughts as passing clouds. You don't have to engage with every thought, just observe them. Schopenhauer believed life was inherently tragic, but humor allows us to take suffering less seriously. Laugh at your struggles. Sometimes things are so bad that all you can do is laugh. Surround yourself with humor. Watch stand-up comedy, read satirical books, and find the funny side of life. Don't take yourself too seriously. Remember, we're all just tiny specks in the universe. If you want to master suffering, consistency is key. Here's a simple daily routine inspired by Schopenhauer's wisdom. Practice detachment. Write down one thing you're letting go of today. Engage with art or music. Listen to a song, read a poem, or watch a thought-provoking film. Reflect on suffering. Ask yourself, what did I learn from my struggles today? Meditate for 5 to 10 minutes to quiet the mind before sleep. The more you practice, the more naturally these habits will become part of you. Suffering is inevitable, but whether it destroys you or strengthens you, that's a choice. By applying Schopenhauer's wisdom, you can reduce unnecessary desires, accept suffering without resistance, find beauty and meaning in art, practice compassion to ease your own pain, use humor to lighten the burden of life. The goal isn't to eliminate suffering, it's to rise above it. As Schopenhauer might say, life is suffering, but wisdom makes it bearable. Now it's up to you to apply it. Schopenhauer saw life as suffering and believed the only way to cope was through detachment, art, and compassion. His philosophy urged people to resign from the endless struggle of existence. Nietzsche, on the other hand, completely rejected this pessimism. Instead of withdrawing, he encouraged people to embrace struggle, harness their power, and create their own meaning. So, who was right? Let's explore their key differences and what we can learn from both. Schopenhauer's philosophy can be summed up in one idea: the will to live is the root of all suffering. He believed we are trapped in an endless cycle of desire, striving, and disappointment. Since we can never be truly satisfied, the best we can do is detach from desires to reduce suffering. Seek refuge in art as a way to momentarily escape life's pain. Develop compassion because understanding others' suffering helps us endure our own. To Schopenhauer, life was a problem to be minimized, not a battle to be fought. Nietzsche admired Schopenhauer's brilliance but rejected his passive approach to suffering. For Nietzsche, life isn't about escaping pain, it's about embracing it. To live is to suffer, to survive is to find meaning in suffering. He argued that instead of detaching from life, we should embrace struggle as a force that makes us stronger. Seek power over ourselves rather than resigning to suffering. Create our own meaning instead of withdrawing from the world. Nietzsche called this the will to power, the drive to overcome obstacles and shape our destiny. In short, Schopenhauer saw suffering as something to escape, while Nietzsche saw it as something to embrace and use as fuel. Schopenhauer was right about suffering being a fundamental part of life. His advice to detach from unnecessary desires can bring peace in a world obsessed with chasing happiness. Nietzsche was right about suffering being necessary for growth. Struggle builds strength, and challenges give life meaning. So, how can we apply both? Use Schopenhauer's wisdom to detach from things that don't serve you, like toxic relationships, materialism, and empty distractions. Use Nietzsche's mindset to face your challenges head-on. Instead of fearing struggle, ask, how can this make me stronger? In the end, neither philosopher had the only answer, because the best path is one that balances both perspectives. Should you follow Schopenhauer and step back from the chaos? Or should you follow Nietzsche and run straight into the fire? Perhaps the real wisdom lies in knowing when to do both. As Nietzsche himself once wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." Whether that why comes from detachment or power is up to you. We've explored some of the deepest and most unsettling truths about life: that suffering is inescapable, that desire fuels our pain, and that we are trapped in a constant cycle of struggle. Schopenhauer saw life as a relentless storm of suffering, and Nietzsche challenged us to face that storm head-on. But regardless of whose philosophy resonates more with you, one truth remains. Understanding suffering is the key to living meaningfully. Instead of running from pain, what if we learn to work with it? Suffering is a fundamental part of life. Trying to escape it only makes it worse. Instead, we should accept it, understand it, and learn from it. Desire fuels dissatisfaction. We always want more, but once we get it, we crave something else. Learning to detach from unnecessary desires brings peace. Struggle is not always bad. Nietzsche taught us that facing pain makes us stronger. Instead of seeing hardship as punishment, we can use it as a tool for growth. Art, compassion, and humor help us transcend suffering. Schopenhauer believed that beauty and creativity offer temporary relief. Compassion connects us to others, and humor reminds us not to take everything too seriously. We must create our own meaning. Whether you follow Schopenhauer's detachment or Nietzsche's strength, only you can decide what gives your life purpose. Think about the most meaningful moments in your life. Did they come from comfort, or did they come after struggle? Often the experiences that shape us the most are the ones that hurt the most. The heartbreak that taught you about love, the failure that pushed you to improve, the loss that made you appreciate what you have. This is what Schopenhauer and Nietzsche were both trying to tell us. Pain is not the enemy. It's part of the journey. Now that you've heard these ideas, how will you apply them? Reflect on your struggles. Instead of resisting them, ask, what can this teach me? Detach from unnecessary desires. Not everything is worth chasing. Use pain as fuel. Let it shape you, not break you. Find beauty in life. Art, music, humor, whatever lifts you out of suffering, embrace it. Share these ideas. The more we talk about suffering, the more we learn to deal with it. What do you think? Do you relate more to Schopenhauer's resignation or Nietzsche's defiance? How do you personally cope with suffering? What lessons have your struggles taught you? Drop a comment below and let's discuss. Because in the end, we're all trying to navigate suffering together. And if you found this video insightful, like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into philosophy, life, and the human experience. Until next time, embrace the struggle, because that's where life truly begins.